Dear Rentals Club members, thank you for joining us now. I am with Victor Bosselaar. He's in charge of data sales and partnerships for AllTheRooms. We'll be talking about data. What's very important here is that usually we get a ton of data about the US market, about Europe, but not so much about either Australia, New Zealand, or Southeast Asia. AllTheRooms has been really amazing here. They pull data just for us. So you'll be able to see what AllTheRooms can usually provide in your own market. But here we have exclusive view of the trends, how the crisis was, what to expect in terms of demand. And Victor will actually guide us through this. So without further ado, Victor, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm quite well. Thank you for having me on. We appreciate being able to talk to your audience and your members.
All right, it's a pleasure. I see behind you a whole board with like lots of mysterious words and diagrams. So it's no secret that your company is into data. So can you maybe introduce a bit, your background and so more about AllTheRooms?
I could talk about my background. I could also talk about this background. I'll be honest that this is from the data team, and I understand none of this. They have to explain it to me again. As you mentioned, I'm on the sales and a bit on the marketing side. And that into my background, I've always worked in the travel industry and the tourism industry. From the media standpoint, I have a marketing background. And so I used to work for this company, Foward Media, and then had some other jobs in New York City. And then what I did is I took essentially a one-way flight down to Medellin, Colombia. Just wanted a kind of a change of pace, something different. And I found this great travel tech company called AllTheRooms. Just AllTheRooms, which is a travel meta search and accommodations meta search engine. And so then I started from a marketing standpoint there, kind of created my own little department, if you will, in AllTheRooms. We saw that we were sitting on this very rich data set for us to be able to feed our meta search platform. We had a very robust database and data in the short-term rental space where we pull data from guys like Airbnb, Vrbo, HomeAway, Booking.com, TripAdvisor, Vacation Rentals. And we were able to mine and curate these reports for guys in the destination marketing organization space, also for hotel brands. We're able to digest it as well for property management companies and individual homeowners and hosts. And for that side, what we're really looking to do is we typically report on past performance. So you're you're benchmarking your property to what the market is doing. And we focus mainly on Airbnb and Vrbo for that data. Given these current times, a lot of our partners, certainly on the enterprise side, but kind of across the board, are very interested in what we're seeing in future booking and future demand profiles. And really, so we've recently built out a new product called our Forward Booking Index over the last 2-3 months to really feed that need, that niche that people need, is understanding what that future demand profile looks like. And what we're trying to do with that is try to track a shift in consumer sentiment or traveler sentiment in hopes to identify or predict a recovery and when a full recovery is going to happen or when a partial recovery and at what rate. And so that's what we've developed for our partners, for our clients. And that's some of the data that we're going to be going through today, trying to understand what's taking place in areas such as New Zealand, Australia, and some of these Southeast Asia regions, and what kind of recovery are we seeing, if at all? Why are we seeing what we're seeing, and when can we expect it?
Cool. So again, data that you guys have is from these big platforms, obviously. Anything we need to know if I'm in Australia, New Zealand, or Southeast Asia? You also have like people like Agoda, for example, in your feeds?
We have data on those feeds. So to feed our meta search platform, we had a host of suppliers and providers. We even had guys like Hostel World, Expedia, Booking for hotels. So we have inventory and supply information of those guys. When we're talking about performance metrics, we're really focused on the short-term rental market, and we're really focused on the Airbnbs and the Vrbos and the HomeAways.
Okay.
mainly. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today.
Super.
Those are our main providers that we look at for performance metrics: occupancy rate, supply, demand.
Cool. That's pretty exciting. So I think it's just dive into it.
Sure.
See the charts and data you guys have put together kindly for the show.
Sure thing. Let me share my screen. All right. So yeah, the areas that we're going to look at here is that side. We're going to focus on Australia, New Zealand, and some Southeast Asian countries and regions, and then some of the cities within each. And then some main themes are going to pop up, which I'll go through as we look at the data. And we're going to be looking at two main pieces here that kind of fall into the themes that we're going to speak about. One, we're going to look at future bookings, as I mentioned. That's really going to tell us what type of recovery are we seeing in these different regions, because it is different in different areas. And we're also going to look at is origin data. And origin data is of the bookings that have already happened pre and post COVID. Are there shifts in where the traveler is coming from? That's very important to note, because that has also a lot of effect or affects a lot in the type of recovery we are seeing. So one of the main themes that I'll discuss. But let's look at here quickly at Australia. What I want to mention first is, if you've seen the red line here is the forward booking of last year. So we're always going to be benchmarking ourselves to the performance of 2019. This is what we're going to call a quote unquote healthy demand profile. This is what we should be seeing. Obviously, we always want to improve year over year, but given these times, this is going to be our benchmark. This is what we're always going to be looking to kind of close that gap. As you can see, 2019 is certainly outperforming what we're seeing in 2020, and what we're trying to see is a closing of that gap. That lets us know that we're in in full recovery. And so what we're looking at is, so this was pulled this past weekend, May 22nd, and so that's what we're seeing here. This is May 22nd, and we're looking forward 180 days. And what we're seeing here in these lines here is when we pulled that same data in previous either weeks or the past month. And what that shows you is, as the time goes on, what is that increase in occupancy rate, and how and what rate are we getting closer to what we should be seeing in 2019? Now, as you'll notice, we'll see in other graphs, this is a promising looking recovery trend here. Okay, so in between here, where this is about 16 days, and so we're seeing. And again, we're always looking at a particular point in time. We're looking at May 22nd. And within those 5 days, you saw an increase of, say, 3 to 4% in occupancy rate for that day. And then there's a steady increase. So that means is over that time, travelers are seeing confidence or having confidence in being able to book short-term rentals throughout Australia. Okay. And so again, decent looking, this is promising. We like what we see here. Again, we're not out of the woods yet. We're not close to what we should be, but we're seeing some good signs, some promising signs.
If I'm correct, if I look at the purple graph is like within the last 7 days, if I'm correct. And as you say, it's pretty close to where it should be, right? For the upcoming days. Right.
Sure. So it is getting closer. There is a bit of a 2-day lag here, as you see. What we don't have are those the peaks, right? And those peaks are usually the normal peaks of a weekend performance, that sort of thing. So we're not getting that just yet. It's a little bit more normalized. If you see, we're not seeing that normal peaks. But in some cases, yes. That, as you see here, this is there's a very small daylight in between it, so that is a great sign. The purple is the data that we pulled on Saturday, so that is the latest data that we have. It's the blue here that is 7 days before. So the difference here, the difference in between those two are the bookings have been made.
Sure.
And so if we look at what we see in Melbourne, we're going to look at Melbourne and Sydney, but let's take a look at Melbourne. We see much more daylight in between that, if compared to Australia as a whole. And not only are we very far away from where we should be with respects to 2019 performance or a benchmark, it's also, we're not seeing that as great of a movement in between data pulls, in between, the weeks that we're pulling or months. And that tells us that there is less confidence. Travelers have much less confidence in being able to book a short-term rental, book travel in the more urban areas in Australia. It's not only that they don't have confidence, they also just don't want to. There is certainly right now a negative perception with urban areas in being able to book travel and wanting to go there. In fact, people are going the other way around. They're trying to get out of the city. That's one of the main themes here and it's not only in Australia, but in North America and Western Europe, what we're seeing is that the urban areas, or rather I should say suburban and rural areas, are outperforming in terms of recovery, and just straight out outperforming that of their urban counterparts, which I guess shouldn't come as much of a surprise. It's the urban areas that are really the hotspots, the virus hotspots that are spreading. People are trying to get out of the city. And in fact, in New York, in areas surrounding New York City, for example, we're actually seeing an increase in year-over-year occupancy rates, funny enough, of people, at least during crisis mode, people wanting to get out of the city. It was almost like a respite for them. So in a metro area in New York, we saw a normally 25% occupancy rates for this time that shot up to 65% occupancy rate because people just wanted to get out of the city. And we do expect to see that trend, not that specific trend, but the theme of people wanting to get out of the city to continue. And the cities will have a tougher time and longer time in terms of recovery. And so that's what you're seeing here in these graphs. And that is common in many other areas.
Very impressive.
Let's see. And if you Surface Paradise, it's a bit of a different story. As you can see, it's certainly, Surface Paradise does have a better a recovery profile than Melbourne and Sydney, for example. As you can see, at least in the short term, we're seeing a greater recovery. There's still work to be done for bookings that are going out a bit further, as you can see. But bookings in the short term it's a promising look, but we're certainly not up to the level where we should be. And that's another thing that we are seeing of late. And it's not only what we see in Australia, for example, is bookings in the short term. So we're seeing more of a recovery of bookings in the short term rather than bookings in the long term, at least for right now. The data doesn't tell exactly why that is. It's anecdotally what we believe is because people are cooped up. They've been in their home for say 2-3 months, whatever it may be, and they just want to go out and they just want to go on a vacation. And usually these are like mini vacations, as you'll see also with our origin data. There's a shift in where people are coming from, and it's very regional or domestic travel. And so that's what we're seeing here, bookings in the short term. Something also Airbnb has alluded to as well a couple of weeks ago when they spoke. You might have seen in the news, they're having some troubles at the moment, financial or otherwise. But what they are seeing is an increase in bookings in the 7-day to 30-day period. And so that's what we're seeing data.
Yeah, exactly. There's an interview over the weekend of Brian Chesky, and he did confirm that huge trends, next 7 days or far out. I think he was even saying further than 6 months from now. It's either right now or when all this is done, which obviously could be a bit different because here we're talking about Australia, New Zealand, where obviously it's not the same season as in the US, where I guess he's taking his that's the data he's taking from the US, but still, as you just said, you can see here clearly people are like, okay, let's book now for now.
Exactly. And that's what we're seeing kind of across the board generally. All right, and so if we look at New Zealand,
did we skip Melbourne or
which one?
Melbourne? Did we have Melbourne there?
Melbourne. Yes. So Melbourne, we kind of package that up with Sydney, as you can see. Very similar trend line to Sydney. Again, another big urban sprawling area. Very tough on recovery. There is some slight recovery here, as you see. There's some increase in confidence over those time periods, but we're really seeing a drastic gap in what should be again a normal forward demand, future demand profile. Again, very similar to that of Sydney. As you can see, trends almost identical.
Cool. Thanks, Victor.
No, not a problem. And if we want to look at New Zealand, I mean, New Zealand is looking pretty good. And even in that short term, in that, you know, let's see, we're looking at a 15-day period. We're almost on par, as I mentioned. There's like a 2-day lag or so, but we're almost on par with the forward performance of last year for at least that 15-day time frame, which is great news. But as you can see, as we go further out, and then, you know, that confidence just isn't there yet. People haven't really, they're not back to normal. You know, once, you know, these restrictions are loosening up, people just say, you know what, let's do something. They want to do something quick. But again, why we're not matching up there is people aren't just booking yet. They're not planning that far out just yet. It's too early to make that. But going to what we just mentioned before, funny enough, it's really those first 7 to 15 days, and what we're seeing across the board in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Queen's birthday is coming next weekend, I think, in New Zealand, so that could be it.
Is that a big
it's a thing.
Reason for celebration?
It's a thing.
So yeah, so this is great news, and we expect to see similar trends here for some of the other areas as well, as they loosen their restrictions. Again, those 7 to 15 days booking should start going back to quote unquote normal. It's always tough when people ask, when are we expecting recovery? The question always is, what does recovery mean? What does that look like? Because that goes in phases. If you look in the short term, you can almost say, oh, we're at recovery here. But really, if you're looking at that healthy future demand profile, we're not there yet. We're certainly not there yet. We have a long ways to go. But this is encouraging, very encouraging. And that, again, and the increases between these time frames is also very encouraging. So if we look at Auckland specifically, we're not getting that same level of increased confidence, although I have to say, if we're comparing this to, say, Melbourne or Sydney, this is doing better than them, as you can see, a greater sense of recovery, greater sense of confidence in being able to book, larger increases in between the reporting periods that we see. And we are following some of those peaks and troughs, but again, still a ways to go. It kind of goes with that, you know, urban to rural theme, if you will.
What's also very interesting is that far out in the future, I guess it's probably Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. You could see in the overall New Zealand data you have, you could sort of see the dates for New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve with the small peaks. And here we don't see anything. So maybe it's not what you do for Christmas. You can spend your time in Auckland. I must say, I have no clue. But it's not even there. Whether in your previous slide, you could kind of guess where Christmas and New Year's Eve that there were some bookings happening. So that's interesting as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think also, at least certainly in the States, when we book things like 4th of July weekend, or if you book certainly like Christmas, those sort of vacations are usually outside of the urban area anyways. So like New York City, for example, doesn't have great occupancy rates for Christmas necessarily. People go outside. At least that's more US based.
But Sydney would be big for New Year's Eve. But I say that's where I confess my lack of knowledge about Auckland, why. Yeah, maybe it's more like the US here, like people go with families somewhere else out of town. Yeah.
I might have to claim my American ignorance, and I'm not familiar with Auckland as much, so I can only comment on what the data is saying.
Good.
Okay, and I think we want to take a look now at some of the Southeast Asian countries where it's starkly different to what we're seeing in Australia and New Zealand. And something I mentioned earlier, at least to you, is and the reason, and this is going to be a theme for all the other the regions and countries in Southeast Asia. What we look at is, and we attribute this to regions or countries or areas with a strong domestic tourism, tend to fare better during these times. Obviously, there are international travel bans that lead to it. So obviously that people from outside cannot come in. When we look at the origin data, you'll see where people going to Indonesia, going to Bali, going to Thailand are for the most part non-domestic travelers. Maybe in Thailand, you'll have people within Thailand, they'll travel. But going to Bali, for example, it's everybody from the US and Australians and Germans, what have you. And obviously during these times, that is not possible. So areas with weak domestic tourism profiles won't fare as well in terms of recovery. They're really relying on international travel to help them come back, which will take longer naturally for recovery. And just because the international borders open up, that doesn't necessarily mean international immediately comes back. A theme that we're seeing across the board is more domestic regional travel, or this is really, I think it's a terrible term, but it's an American term called staycation, which means that there's a vacation or a holiday that you stay in your area. I know it's a horrible term. We tend to have those terms in America, but that is a theme that we are seeing, and we expect to continue seeing, just because of the perception here that people are still kind of scared, and will be for a little while, to hop in a plane or be in a confined area, go to an airport, and so that's going to be tough for guys in Indonesia, in Thailand, and what have you.
Yeah, Indonesia is interesting. To your point, is that it actually has a very strong domestic travel market, but it's not the same type of accommodations that where tourists, international tourists stay. And for example, as we're filming, it's the end of Ramadan in Indonesia. And there's a lot of moves, a lot of things happening for the end of Ramadan. But it's and we now of course have people over Jakarta with a lot of money who can book villas in Bali, for example. But it's to your point, it's not probably the same type of properties or channels even, right? That are booked that are, for example, used by people from Singapore or Hong Kong. Singapore especially, who could come for a staycation. It's not far, it's a 2-hour flight to Bali. They could come for a staycation, but it's right now they're just probably not coming.
Got it. I think you make a good point about the platform. Obviously, our data is focused on the Airbnbs and the Verbos of the world. That might then be more geared toward a particular clientele, because when we look at the origin data, you'll see it's more Western country oriented, and that might be something to point out, that if you are focused on these specific platforms, maybe look at other ones if you're not already doing so, to maybe hopefully take advantage more of the domestic tourism, because that's really what it's going to be right now, and we're going to continue to see those trends.
Yeah.
So just quickly, I think this is pretty self-explanatory in what we're seeing. We are well below where we should be, although this is somewhat of a good sign. Again, this is within a 5-day, 7-day span. And so from a month ago to say 14 days ago, this increased by 5%, which is a strong increase. Then it kind of tailed off. this is where we should be, and we're well below that moment. So, up to say 30% here, but we're looking at, we're looking at single-digit occupancy rates. So we have really some serious ways to go with respects to recovery for Indonesia as a whole. And then, if we look at Bali, essentially the same trend lines. We're not really, as you can see, there's no real difference in between those. Again, the same thing, say 5% jump from 30 days to 14 days, but then tailing off and serious daylight in between where we should be. Just completely goes to the theme that we spoke about.
Yeah. And the Bali market being so important, I guess, Indonesia, when it comes to verbal bookings and Airbnb, I guess a lot of the overall data over Indonesia is actually probably weight. Bali has a super big weight into the Indonesian data. So that's why also maybe the charts are a bit similar.
Yeah. And then Ubud, I think, has a similar, is exactly the same, essentially.
So that's interesting as well, because what we have now in Bali as well is like, for the last 2 months, a lot of stranded travelers, like either digital nomads stuck there or a lot of Russian travelers stuck there. And what we hear a lot is like people negotiating super hard and just like switching from one place to another, but just like they need a place like right now for 2 days from now, and that's it. Right? That's the only. There's also so the only demand happening. I don't know if you see it on the data that some bookings are happening from Bali to Bali, because I know that on the conference we have Bali managers who actually tell us that a lot of these transactions happening on the phone or through WhatsApp or Facebook groups. People on the island stranded would be booking, but it's interesting to see again the actions like for the next few days and not much beyond that, right?
Exactly. We'll see for Bali. We'll look at some of the origin data. Yes. But I think we see it from on a country, what countries are coming from, not necessarily cities. It's something we can possibly pull later, but that's what we have for now. Mm-hmm. One thing I'm noticing, I don't want to take up, I want to look at the origin data as well. I don't know how we're doing on time. I don't want to.
I think we're good, because it's very interesting, and but let's
good.
Let's go on.
Okay, sure. Okay, Singapore is a bit of a different animal than to the other regions in Southeast Asia. When we see the origin data, they do have more kind of regional travel, as you'll see. But again, performance-wise, I think they're doing a little bit better than Indonesia, a little bit better than Bali. Again, if you look at that increase, at least from the 30 days to 14 days, but there is a pattern here, what we're seeing, and for some reason that in the last 14 days, that last period has been it's been condensed in terms of people continuing to book, and that's something what we hadn't seen in the other areas. In say Australia and New Zealand, where there was kind of consistent growth over those time frames, it really has then condensed on top here. That is something we have to look into why we think that's the case. Don't have an answer for you guys right now, but I do find that an interesting pattern that we're seeing with these Southeast Asian regions. But continuing that pattern also is bookings of the 7 to 50, really 5 to 7 days. Let's see, and then we have Thailand and Bangkok. Thailand is looking better. Thailand is certainly looking better. But again, we're really also, we're going back to the 5, 7 days, maybe to 15 days performance. Sound like a broken record. But at least at that point, we are getting somewhat closer than some of the other regions we just looked at, right? So there is a tightening of that gap. That's again what we're looking for, getting back to that baseline. That's what we're seeing here. Obviously, we're not as good as we're not looking as good as in Auckland or Surfers Paradise. Excuse me, not Auckland, just New Zealand as a whole or Surfers Paradise. But this is more promising than the other regions we just saw. 30 days to 14 days, a nice jump. That's say a 5% jump or so, and then a continuation of that. Look, that is always going to be a little bit tighter as those time frames are smaller. But that's a better sign than what we've seen in Indonesia, Bali, Ubud as well. But so generally better than what we're seeing, a bit more positive in terms of recovery for Thailand. And then if we look at Bangkok, not so much. Again, going with the theme of big urban areas that people do not want to, are less comfortable in booking. That's just the consumer, the traveler sentiment we're seeing across the board. People are just not booking these urban areas. And although there is some, there's some light here, which tails off. So we do have that 7-day window that people are booking. We are very much far away where we should be, hinting at a recovery that will take a little bit longer than some of the other areas that we've looked at. I'm going to go now into, and then we have last one. This is an interesting one. This certainly kind of bucks the trend of the other areas that we looked at. And now what it continues that trend here is that week, that 7-day booking time frame. And if you actually look at, there's only one day in which we hit our 2019 levels, right, and hit our baseline. So that's essentially just one day does, and then it tails off a bit. Okay, but so that is at least the start of that. We're quote unquote back to normal. Obviously, if we would have to see more of this type of trend for us to be back to normal. But again, we have that one data point, and that this is, we like to see this increase over those timeframes. It tells us that people have confidence in being able to book again, and this is a very good sign that we're at least at one point hit normal occupancy rates. But again, as that's been tailing off. But what that tells me is this should improve as we go, and we'll be pulling it in, next week and the following week, and we expect to have at least more of that 7-day range meet up with our baseline. That's what I would expect to see in the coming weeks or so. That what we're seeing is that 7-day, 14-day forward range where what people are booking. I expect us to be able to get closer to what that 2019 demand levels. So this is an interesting one, certainly bucking the trend or bucking the pattern for what we saw for the other Southeast Asian regions. Okay, so I believe we ran through all the forward bookings or the future booking, future demand profiles of the areas. Now we want to take those same areas, and what we want to do is we want to look at the origin data. Where are people coming from? And as I mentioned, just to reiterate, the areas with a greater domestic travel profile tend to fare better with respects to recovery as a whole, or on the whole. But again, as you mentioned before, we are looking at Airbnb, Vrbo, HomeAway platforms, so that might skew where people are coming from. So something to note while we go through this data.
Yeah, we can think of Chinese travelers, obviously, right? If you in Southeast Asia, Australia, we think about Chinese travelers who are probably booking through different channels. That's probably why they don't. Yep,
exactly right. And then, so not only and you'll see a lot of these already have an established, we're talking about strong domestic tourism, so they already have that. But what you're also seeing is from pre and post COVID, and I'll explain what that means in a sec, you'll also see then a shift in a greater percentage, greater ratio of domestic travel. And when we're saying pre and post COVID, obviously we're still very much in the midst of COVID, but it's what we're talking about is that time when it started really kicking off. That's when in the news, in the media, where it became, okay, this thing is spreading, lockdown measures are starting to take place. So I think to be on the generous side, we did mid-February or February 1 is when we did that cutoff. Obviously, you know, it was in the news prior to that, but it really wasn't kicking off as a global pandemic yet. And so we said, okay, February 1, that's really, you know, when it kind of kicked off in the media, in our minds. And we thought that that's when all these things would start taking place. So that's what we mean by pre and post COVID, is around the February 1. Okay, so looking at Australia as a whole, as you see, Australia, the domestic travel is by far the greatest piece of where people are coming from when they're booking through these platforms. And as you'll note, so then also over that time, you'll see an increase in the ratio of domestic travelers here. Again, blue is prior to February 1, and then in red, it's past that point. And yeah, and then also a lot of that has to do with mainly, you know, any international travel bans and that sort of thing. When we look at some of the cities in Australia, similar, although they have a larger international tourism profile than Australia as a whole, at least with respects to ratios and percentages. So where we saw 80 to 85% for Australia as a whole, when we're looking at Melbourne and Sydney as well, where that goes down to about 55%, or let's call it 58% of pre-COVID, and then that jumps up to 62, 63% post-COVID period. And then you'll see, you know, for those other areas that there is, except for the United Kingdom, everything else kind of drops off. Again, the makeup of the tourism of travelers. And then Sydney, same thing. They even have a lower percentage of domestic travel. Although, again, you'll notice there's about a 5% difference so far. Again, we only expect that to grow further. This is a trend that we expect to continue at least in the short term. Is more of these staycations, greater propensity for people to stay within a region. Domestic travel or even smaller, like short term, and travel via car, that sort of thing. Here, Surfers Paradise goes more towards our trends that we see as Australia as a whole. Greater percentage of domestic travel versus some of the bigger cities. Again, that goes to also their ability to recover quicker. Larger domestic tourism profile is you'll see a quicker recovery, better recovery. And here, pre and post COVID, you see an increase in domestic travel of about 7% here, 6%. Okay, and then let's New Zealand. This one, let me take a look. This one, oddly enough, does not follow the trend of Australia. What we're seeing is actually from pre to post a drop in domestic travel, as you can see here. A drop about, say, 3%, 4%. Oddly enough, where that's making up is, well, a touch in Australia, a touch in the United Kingdom, Germany, France, which we find a very odd trend. We haven't been able to put our finger on the reason for that just yet. Again, we just pulled that data, so it's something we should look into. But that New Zealand certainly bucking the trend, what we're seeing in Australia and other areas.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But in Auckland, when we look at it, continues that. So increase in domestic travel from, say, 32% to 37%. But again, Auckland, not much lower with respects to domestic tourism. They make up, from here we see about a third of the tourism, or about a third of people booking short-term rentals, and then kind of somewhat evenly spread out from the US and Australia, United Kingdom, Germany, and Canada. As again, we're looking at our top 10 origin countries. And so you do see, especially from the U.S., you see that so they take less of a percentage of the people there. Again, hinting at a greater an increase in domestic tourism. but it's a more international profile than New Zealand as a whole, and some of these other rural areas. Really, again, hammering home the theme we're talking about, that areas with greater domestic tourism have a better chance of recovery. Okay, so Indonesia, as you mentioned here, that it's that the domestic travel is the number one. So Indonesia is the top origin destination for tourism. So even through these platforms, and then, but actually, from what we're seeing is that has actually decreased, oddly enough, from, they made up about 27%, or at least guys booking through an Airbnb, booking short-term rentals. That actually went down to, say, a 24%, oddly enough. But that's also kind of a down on growth. USA being the second largest country where people are coming from, that also has then gone down.
But I would really hear, interesting enough, I don't know if it explains something about New Zealand, but here clearly we can see the stranded Russians as a trend, right? These people who are on the island or in Bali, for example, who need to book something. And it's probably, I don't know, maybe it's all relative, right? Maybe there's so many of them that it's making the percentage of people from Indonesia go down just because actually Russia is increasing. I don't know if it's relative, but could be a reason.
Yeah, and it's something we can certainly look into. But yes, that is an interesting trend here. What you said, that pickup of people from Russia, and that probably then makes up for why we're seeing that gap here from Indonesian tourists. Sure. Okay, Bali.
Yeah.
Same thing. See here, and Russia. Seeing a similar trend here. Again, a decrease in about, say, 5%, 4%. Oh, excuse me, this is USA. I apologize. My mistake. This must be because I would have to look into why that is. So Indonesia here falls into the fifth spot right now. If you think about it, prior to COVID, it would have been in fourth place. It would have been the fourth top country of tourism, but then got surpassed by both Russia and the United Kingdom over that time, as well as Germany, it looks like. So oddly enough, also Australia is bang even. So we haven't seen really a change, at least in ratios, in percentages. USA, a big drop off. No surprise there. What I am surprised about is Indonesia being at the sixth spot.
Again, right, it could be people who are maybe Australians or Germans or Russians who are on the island. They're just booking right now. And maybe the country of origin says Russia, Germany, Australia, because these people are from there with their Airbnb accounts, but actually they're booking from Indonesia.
Yes, correct. I think that's a fair assessment of what we're seeing. And then if Ubud, Indonesia is further down the list here. The increase by Russia that's an interesting one to me. That does seem to be a theme across all the areas in Indonesia and the areas within. So that is an odd one to me. That's funny to see. But they're really the only one that we're seeing an increase, a relative increase compared to all the other ones. And Germany here, and maybe that I think what you mentioned is a very fair assessment of what we're seeing here in the data.
No, it is really great because again, we hear the stories. I would reverse it, right? We heard these stories about Russians are stranded. You're like, yeah, but how big is that story? And then boom, we look at data. We're like, wait a minute, there's something happening with Russia. And like, whoa, okay, these stories do make up. At least we kind of see something in data that could be it. But that's interesting.
My question then for you is why Russians specifically more than other nationalities?
Because there's two reasons. First, some people at the beginning, it's been very hard for them to go back to Russia. The flights stopped. So to evacuate Bali, you have to be on this very short list of people who could be on these emergency flights.
Mm-hmm.
And some of us just decided to ride out the storm in Bali rather than going back to Russia. So it was a very big thing. Other countries could, bit by bit, they could still leave Bali, but the Russians were stuck basically, or decided to stay on. So that's why the tendency of having a lot of Russians became bigger over the last weeks.
Understood. Okay. Interesting. Okay, when we look at Singapore, I mean, it's pretty obvious here that the increase in domestic travel here.
Yeah.
From I think this is the starkest, the biggest difference from all the areas that we looked at. That increase in domestic travel. Here we're looking at a 9% normally. Prior to COVID, excuse me, the 9% of short-term rental bookings came from Singapore, and now it's up to 25%. By far the biggest increase that I think we're seeing in these different regions. USA number 2 going down. Australia, Germany, funny enough, has somewhat of an uptick, going from say 3% to 5%, and at the tail end, Japan and France as well. But again, as you might mention, it could be due to guys that are trying to ride it out, so to speak. There could be an element there. But again, big increase in domestic travel, and that's what we're looking for. That's going to be a good sign for a quicker recovery. All right, let's take a look at our couple other areas. We have Thailand and Bangkok we want to take a look at. Here, Thailand comes in at number 3 as their as top origin destination. China and USA being 1 and 2 respectively. Both China and US seeing a drop in making up of those travelers. Thailand, unfortunately, as well, where we're seeing is similar to what we saw in Indonesia, but Russians here trying to ride that out, apparently. Maybe we're seeing a similar theme with German nationals as well as French nationals.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. Bangkok. Okay, so here we're seeing actually an increase in ratios of Chinese nationals that are in Bangkok. USA, opposite trend, going down. Similar to what we saw in Thailand as a whole. German nationals staying here, trying to ride that out. Australians as well. Thailand, let's call that about even for argument's sake. But here, Japanese and French nationals, again, also an uptick. Guys trying to ride it out, quote unquote. And then Koh Samui. This is quite an interesting one as well. But similar to what we saw in Thailand as a whole. Again, German nationals, French nationals, Russian nationals. Those are the ones that seem to be continue to be booking, staying here, trying to ride it out. And so, as you mentioned, so it's not like more people are coming in from those nations, but those are the ones that are staying there. Those are the ones that are booking more. And that's why we're seeing, because it's all relative, that's why we're seing that increase. I mean, German nationals from about 9% to making up to 15%, by far the biggest increase, French as well, and then Russians as well. So interesting anecdotal evidence from your side, and then we're seeing that being proven out with the data. So very interesting stuff on that end.
Yeah, great.
And I believe that's it. I hope that was insightful, or at least give some idea of what we're seeing, and certainly that forward booking, that future demand profile is something we're keeping very close track of, and that's something we'll continue to update and share, because that is how you're going to get prepared and know when you can expect those bookings to come back in full swing. Just to reiterate, we're really seeing an uptick in the bookings in the short term. We're really talking about 5 to 7 days, sometimes to 14 days. That's where we're seeing the focus in recovery at the moment. We see good early signs that we're going to get quote unquote back to normal, at least in areas in Australia, in New Zealand, on a whole more in the rural and suburban regions. It's going to be a longer recovery for urban areas, as well as in some of these areas in Southeast Asia.
Thank you so much, Victor, because I think, yeah, you just mentioned the trends as we've seen. That's a great summary. And as well, throughout this conference, we hear several people talking about Bali, for example, Australia, and from their own point of view, right, as property managers. And here, thanks to you, thanks to AllTheRooms, could really see these anecdotes take shape in this graph with these bars, right? Oh, the stranded Russians, the famous stranded Russians. You know what? They do exist, but there's maybe other nationalities out there. The digital nomads, people just being there, the French people who retire usually to Thailand or go there in some month. Maybe they're just there. So it's interesting because it does show, give some data, give us some data behind the anecdotes, and I really like. And that's why we really want to encourage everyone to reach out to you, to AllTheRooms, because it's really, really important to also have ideas beyond anecdotes. What does the data say? What can you learn from that? And we could see talking to each other, how matching both, because obviously a property manager knows her or his market way better than us right now. But with the data, the conjunction is really, really amazing. So what would be the best way, Victor, for people who want to know more about AllTheRooms, get some data? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Sure. I was just, as you mentioned, was just thinking about that. And something we are providing, we just recently launched one of our interactive dashboard that is still in beta phase. And we are providing free access to anybody that wants to get on it, unfeathered access. You can search for any particular area. This is past performance. You go to alltherooms.com/analytics. You're able there to sign up, and the full launch is coming soon, within a week or so. So if you must sign up prior to that, but once you're in, you get grandfathered in and you'll get free access for like a month or so. And then after that, there will be some paid versions. The forward booking index that I went over, it won't be full, right? But a pared down version will then be included on the dashboard as well. So that's something you can keep track of, and then you can see the recovery as it goes. So something to look out for. That will come in later iterations of the dashboard. But again, go to alltherooms.com/analytics. You'll be able to pull up the performance for your area. You'll see May is about to end. So in about a week or so, we'll have May data. And again, feel free to check it out. That's how you get it. If you want something more in depth, you can always contact me and we can do some custom work together.
Amazing, Victor. Once again, Victor Bosselaar from AllTheRooms. Thank you so much for your time. Super clear explanation. And well, I can only again encourage people to reach out to you. Have a great day.